welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome Andy Snodgrass. He's a research vice president at Directions on Microsoft, with a focus on Microsoft's business applications like Dynamics and Power Platform, as well as database and business intelligence tools. Andy and I have been trading notes on various developments in the Dynamics and Power Platform space for years, trying to decipher Microsoft's official guidance and what it really means for the ecosystem. As you'll hear, Andy has a very keen eye for something his firm's clients really look for: guidance on planning, licensing, and software lifecycles. We talk about how he's advising organizations that are transitioning from on-prem to the cloud in terms of pricing and licensing, software compatibility, and future planning around new cloud services like those of the Power Platform. He also shares his views on some of the emerging D365 apps like Commerce and HR, and we discuss the current state of the business applications organization at Microsoft overall. All right, Andy Snodgrass, hey, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jason. It's nice to be here, my man.
Yeah, and great to finally have you on. You're someone who I've been trying to and thinking about getting onto our podcast as a guest for a while now. We've known each other for several years, mostly connecting at conferences. And I have to say, I'd like you to tell our listeners more about who you are and what you do. I think, from my perspective, you're one of the people who sort of knows the most about this space, but perhaps is not as well known by the people who I tend to talk to and work with or interact with in this space. I don't know how many of them actually know you, even though they probably should. So, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're up to, what you what you follow, what you write about, maybe a little bit about the Directions on Microsoft as well.
Yeah, sure, no problem. The company I'm with, I've been with them about 7 years, but Directions on Microsoft has been covering the whole Microsoft stack, including licensing, since 1992, amazingly. They do nothing but that. They're just exclusive coverage of Microsoft, right? And we do a bunch of analysis reports, a bunch of licensing reports, a lot of webinars. And it's a subscription-based service, and so people come in and they buy a subscription to use all the resources that we produce. It's a lot of big enterprises, mostly our customer base. But our approach is that we've got a bunch of analysts, and we do a really deep dive on technology because that's where we all come from. And then we figure out all the so whats and gotchas and everything, and then try to surface those up to a higher level so it's very readable. Okay, and so it's one of these things where you can give it to your director, your executives, your management, and they're able to understand a very technical issue without having to get into the technology. Okay, so yeah, that's the kind of thing we do.
All right, great. And in terms of the products that you personally cover, I know it changes a little bit over time. What are you most focused on these days?
So I head up our research over the whole Dynamics stack. All the ERP, CRM, Business Central, both in the cloud and on premises. If you think about it, we got a lot of enterprise customers, so we've got a lot of legacy stuff. We actually have customers. One of our big things now is talking to our customers about moving from things like CRM 4. Amazingly, a lot of older CRM related stuff, they want to go to the cloud now. So I cover all the CRM stuff, and I also head up the group that does all of our database and business intelligence related stuff. And so I do all the on-prem database, all the Azure related stuff, the whole Power BI stuff. So I'm stretched pretty thin across all these things, but it's fun stuff. I don't have to do it all myself, so that's nice.
I mean, this has to be, I don't know, is it still, I think, hybrid obviously is a very big conversation piece everywhere, but also not just sort of hybrid in general, but the decisions around what a goal is for hybrid in terms of like, what are people going to keep in an on-premise, in on-premise or SQL Server instances versus, putting in the cloud with perhaps a totally different pricing model. And when they make those decisions, I imagine there's a ton of debate internally at a lot of Microsoft customers these days, trying to figure out, what factors play into that decision, from the challenge technically to the cost of it and the financial impact on the company.
Well, it's interesting on that because we sat down and did a lot of analysis on the pricing models, and this is Dynamics and SQL and a bunch of other stuff. And, you know, anymore, if you do something on-prem, you're going to be buying for the server license and all the cows and everything that are there. But pretty much everything that's new is requiring you to go with software assurance, and that allows you to do the upgrades and have updates and all the rest of it. If you take in the model of the initial purchase price plus those software assurance annual payments, and then you go to the renting aspect of going in the cloud and paying for a similar service there, it works out that it's about a 4-year comparison, okay, which is usually the point when people on premises will wind up replacing on-premises software anyway. Okay? And so I think the cost related issue, for at least for the software side, is not as big as a discussion as it used to be. I think now more people are looking at it saying, I'm going to go to the cloud because Microsoft is innovating there much quicker. The newer features are coming out there, but also because I can deploy there quicker. I can scale up and I can scale down quicker than I can on-prem, and I don't have to worry about all my server management. And to be quite honest, having come from a large enterprise background, the security model for Microsoft's data centers is better than almost every other enterprise's security models they could have. Okay, and especially if you get into the mid-business range, there's no data center that you have that could have as tight a security as Microsoft's doing in their cloud data centers. Okay? You just can't get that. And so I think that's the decision now is more of, I want the functionality, I want the benefits. Cost is not coming into discussions that we have with most people.
That's interesting. Because I tend to agree, although I do hear some customers on the dynamic side. It tends to be, I guess maybe personally I've had the conversation more with like AX to D365 FO, planning or people who are looking at that possible transition. And some maybe this is companies that are on the smaller side for like an AX customer profile, but they do think about the costs, and that's it. It never seems to be. Well, I'm not convinced that. I'm not convinced that the cloud, that the cloud version, that they agree that this is where Microsoft is innovating. This is where the features are going first. And that's where they're focusing their R&D in the future. But, is it worth the cost? So, I mean, maybe it does vary by company and at the larger enterprise side.
Oh, yeah.
They must know the costs of running like a CRM4, system in their data centers must be a pretty well-known sort of quantity at this point.
Well, absolutely. And so if you take a look at it from that perspective, especially the client who's on an older version of something, they originally bought that software and they bought the cows and all the associated costs with that thing. And they said, we're going to depreciate this thing over a 4, 5, or 6 year period, right? And they've already ended that. So at this point, if I'm a finance guy and I'm looking at it, I'm looking at this going, I don't have any costs associated with this CRM app that I have on-prem, but now you tell me I'm going to have a monthly or an annual subscription that I have to pay over here. These aren't compatible. And that is the difference between it. If you're a company that wants to stretch out the value of that initial purchase beyond 4 years, okay, let's say that's the break-even point on it, then an on-prem is your best potential situation on it. Okay, you can stretch that out as long as you want. I just wrote a really interesting report for execs on understanding the difference between perpetual and subscription, okay, and the licensing cost model. And the big one, a lot of customers that still want to stay on-prem come back to is, if I have a downturn in business, if the coronavirus is suddenly impacting my organization, right, and I know my sales are going to go down, that doesn't matter if I have a subscription. I still have to pay that same amount. Okay, I can't make the decision to stretch out the value that I have on my initial purchase if I'm in a subscription. It's a fixed cost. I have to keep paying it no matter what. It's like the electricity.
Right. The other interesting one I've heard was for a company that was, I think owned by private equity, and they didn't want to see new operating expenses. They were okay with approving capital expenses, but anything that was going to impact the earnings of that company was going to be a problem. And they were going to look at headcount to make up the difference if they were going to spend several thousand more dollars a month on on subscription software, which I hadn't considered before I heard that. But and I
Yeah,
think yeah.
you're getting into a real finance discussion there on that one, and I
Well,
love this
it was
kind of
funny
thing.
because it was
Okay,
one of the first
so
things that the CIO brought up, and he's a sort of a
yeah.
understands AX well and sort of understood the cloud option well. But he said, "Well, here's one of the main reasons why we're not doing it," and
Yeah,
sort of just put that out there.
and if you're on a security based firm, if you're a private equity firm, then balance sheets, cash flow, and profitability are all that you're really paying attention to, right? Because that's what private equities do. Now, if you're a large industrial enterprise, you know, carrying some of the IT costs as assets on your balance sheet because you've made on-premises purchases, no big deal. It's not going to outweigh anything that you've done with purchasing, manufacturing, and rolling stock equipment and all the rest of that. The IT portion is a small percentage on it. If you get into a services organization where it's mostly white collar, traditional IT and the data center costs and all of the capex that's associated with that winds up being in the top 5 of capital expenditures. It's usually somewhere right behind real estate. And so, yeah, it depends on the company, the size of them, the profile that they have, their expansion programs, their global footprint. There's a bunch there that comes into play on whether I want to go subscription or on-prem.
So, kind of looking at your broader sort of research coverage for yourself. I mean, we've seen with the business applications product area in particular. I mean, it's broadening very quickly. There's just there's insights apps, there's mixed reality apps, there's other there's elements of Power Platform that are showing up, each with their own pricing, licensing. Is that something that you're kind of trying to watch? Are there ways that you're prioritizing what you're watching within that space, kind of beyond those core, the CRM, customer experience and F&O type of kind of core apps within the mix?
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye. We're keeping an eye because there's a group of us now that are keeping an eye on pretty much all of it and taking a look and some of the trends, like all the AI, the insights related stuff that are going on there. When I take a look at the Dynamics group of products, I've got core applications is the way I always like to refer to them. Then we've got all the add-ons, right? Like all the insights and capabilities that are there. But then there's all these standalones that are on the side as well, like fraud protection and the rest of these things that they can operate on their own, but they also interface and integrate with the Dynamics core stuff. And when you get into this a la carte pricing scenario and picking scenario, I like that approach because then you only buy what you actually want and need, right? But it does get a little complex with trying to figure out if Sales Insight is receiving a service update and the core sales app hasn't been updated properly yet, then I've got to do this in this sequence. And those could have a knock-on effect to integrations that I do with marketing or market insights and customer insights and customer service insights. And so I think one of the things that's probably the most interesting in that spectrum, at least from a traditional IT organization standpoint, is your application admins, your dynamic implementation and support admins that are out there that control all this stuff and manage all your integrations. They have a lot of work to do, and it's a constant work. It's no longer I'm waiting for a service pack or a cumulative update to come around and I'm going to do that in the next quarter. There are updates that occur every month, and you have to have some kind of matrix where you understand all the different parts that you subscribe to and that you have in play and how updates in one affect updates in other, and then schedule all the appropriate updates for everything in your environment at the right time. And that's hard work.
Yeah, it certainly sounds complex. My sense in dealing with those challenges is, you could tell me, but I hear a lot of partners in the business application space sort of gearing up to be the advisors for their clients on a lot of those sort of ongoing challenges. I think there's the initial challenge of, well, how am I going to sort of, what am I going to advise my clients to just purchase, like what combination of apps and licenses do they
Yeah,
need
and
and
then
how?
maintain it. Yeah.
Yeah, but then are they going to maintain it? Can I provide a managed service on top of that to do all those complex, you know, sort of ongoing things that an admin or an admin team, I guess, would have to do? I don't know. Do you? I would assume maybe for larger enterprises, they've got people in their IT department or elsewhere who can say, okay, well we'll set aside resources to watching this on a quarterly basis or monthly basis, and we'll take care of it. But I imagine a lot of companies might say, like, I just want a Microsoft, someone who just knows these apps to just watch it and keep them updated for us or advise us how to. I don't know. Is that inside of your view at all?
Yeah, actually, that's very much inside our view. I mean, we have several thousand customers that subscribe with us and get services from us, and the ones that are Dynamics related, that threshold, that bar of I'm going to do it myself, keeps going higher and higher. We're seeing more of the mid range, and even some of the larger customers saying, I'm going to do this with a partner. There is just so many moving parts, so much going on here, so much change and so rapidly that I'm going to go with a partner who is tracking this for multiple customers because they'll do a better job of maintaining it and knowing what's going on than I'm going to do. We have, God, I could probably name half a dozen of our largest customers with Dynamics that are doing it themselves. But some of these people are like, they'll have a headquarters environment. I've got one that has a headquarters environment with F&O, with 15 remote F&O sites.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're running a single instance, multiple subscriptions, or multiple deployments of it under a single subscription, and then doing consolidations back. And they're not retail. That's the one that gets me. They're not retail. These are actual for service-related sites that they have. But yeah, they're big enough. They do it on their own.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we'll continue to see. I never heard a lot about managed services in this space. I know it. There have always been managed service offerings. I just never heard a lot about them myself because I don't know. It was kind of maybe mundane or just something that it wasn't changing a lot. But I think there's just a new push because maybe it's a sort of a different offering going forward, or companies that are seeing a new opportunity to pitch it to maybe prospects who hadn't considered it before, but now they're lining up. But now they're considering it much more strongly. Whereas when they had their own server, they had their admin who could watch for the annual or semi-annual cumulative updates, but otherwise it wasn't that complex of a part of their job.
And that actually, so Jason, this is an interesting one that I've been watching, and there's only 2 cases of this, so I'm not going to call it a trend yet, but I think it's going to be a trend. There's this thing that I'm calling aggregate applications. Okay, now follow me on this one, right. Okay? So we have the core apps, right? Finance, sales, customer service, retail, all the rest of this stuff. Well, recently they introduced commerce, right?
Right.
And commerce, it has retail. Inherently, it is retail, but it's deeply integrated with finance and supply chain management and customer service. And in fact, functionality from those other applications are surfaced in the UI, okay? Which means you don't have to have finance and supply chain management running. If you do for more robust people, then it's a great integration because the data just flows back and forth. But you can run commerce and use those capabilities without having to subscribe to finance and supply chain. But those apps continue to get updated and progress as well. Now let's move forward a little way to the new announcement, project operations. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden we have PSA, right? Service automation stuff that was kind of off in its customer engagement area for packaging, although it was always updated on its own anyway, is now falling under the operations side, and it's going to have this integration with finance, sales, and project for the web. Okay? And so it's inherently it's PSA with integrations and showing functionality from these other apps. And so I look at these as commerce and project operations as like aggregate apps. Okay? The concern that I have off of that as an IT admin is that's an awful lot of integration with other stuff. And it will probably work really well. But that does mean as those other core apps, the finance, supply chain, and the rest continue getting functionality, it has the potential of affecting my commerce, my project operations apps.
Yeah.
And so this spider web is starting to feel more and more like a traditional ERP than these isolated core applications that we used to have.
That's interesting, and I definitely see where you're going with that. I think another step maybe along the same lines is companies that say, well, I don't exactly want either of those, and I don't exactly want to buy licenses for all of my users for one of those pre-built apps. I'm going to use the Power Apps, model-driven apps approach, and I'm going to create my own aggregate apps, a set of those, and I'm also going to license. And now I've got things that are pulling in maybe data from a range of sources plus our own custom, features, and that perhaps gets even more complex in another, in another direction. But yeah, no,
it does remind you though of the old days, right? It's like, okay, so we've got this. The whole lure to these cloud services was it's already set up. It's already running.
Yeah.
Okay, it has what you need. Just go there and use it. You can stand up and run in no time. Like Power BI, right? It was always 5 minutes or 50 seconds to sign up, 5 minutes to report. They had this really cute thing of you could be up in no time, and now it's like Dynamics. It's so complex that you have to have actual admins whose job it is to maintain this stuff.
Yeah,
it's not wrong, and I appreciate the fact that Dynamics and the rest have matured to the degree that they have, because they're really functional, and I think they're great environments to be in. But don't go there thinking it's going to make your life easy. You still have the hard work of architecting and doing the right thing for your company by integrations and deployment. It's still tough work.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And Microsoft is certain. I think they do want to delineate between their first-party apps and things that are really development, platforms or development tools. Even I guess you could put Power BI into that, in that you're building your reports on it. It's or Power Apps for that matter. But yeah, it's certainly retail has always, and now commerce has always had that sort of issue where they're not always running on the. I think they're not always lined up perfectly with the latest F&O finance release or supply chain release for whatever the features they use. That they're always a little lagging in sort of managing that separately, and project. It will be very interesting to see how project operations lines up with that too. I think human resources might be another one, because I had a guest on the podcast recently who was sort of explaining it to me, and I just have so many questions about human resources. Where's that product really going, right? Like, is it going to be competing with real like HRM solutions out there? Is it really just an add-on that Microsoft's going to put in front of existing customers looking at D365 apps? I think it kind of remains to be seen. But it's another one, because it's pulling the functionality out of F&O and sort of trying to move it ahead on its own.
And I think that's actually a really good approach. They came out with that whole talent thing is an attempt to, which I thought was a little odd, was to duplicate what LinkedIn was doing, which they also owned. Okay? And I understood some of it, the onboarding, and there were some capabilities in there that I thought were really nice. And I certainly liked the deployment model on it. It worked well. But it had this feeling of separation where it felt like it should really be part of HRM. And I think if they pull that from finance, because it's not a finance function, right? This is an HR function.
Right.
So they needed a SKU for HR professionals in an organization. If you bring in your talent stuff that you had built, which was, had some good stuff there, with the HR core stuff that was in the F&O side, and say, let's make a real HR module, that makes me as an enterprise focused guy really happy, because that's the type of thing that my customers need.
It's a little bit of a lesser known. I guess the other option would have been for HR, for commerce and content. The other option would have been, I guess Microsoft chose on both of those to just build or adapt what they kind of already owned. as opposed to doing what every other big, major software vendor did, which was acquire content, acquire e-commerce, acquire, perhaps HR, a smaller HR firm that they could, vendor that they could integrate. Microsoft really hasn't done that in quite a while. I think I don't know why, but all they've done is sort of make these very small incremental acquisitions for small functional areas to sort of augment in recent years.
When you and I first met years ago, we were going to Convergence, okay, down in Atlanta. My God, they were on a buying streak there.
And I mean, so many of them crashed and burned, or just faded away. Most of those. Offhand, I'm trying to think of one that really survived and has done well, but most of them didn't. The gamification, I think, maybe still exists.
There was a very
Blue
small
Horseshoe.
module. Yeah, remember Blue Horseshoe came in with some of the warehousing stuff.
That survived.
Well, it got integrated properly, and some of it is they get the technology because it's a good third party or partner that's actually developed it that works well with Dynamics. But I think the real talent that they had there was that they would grab the people who had the skill sets and the understanding of what that meant, and then they would bring them into the fold and say, now develop it here.
Yeah. Portals has survived. That was ADX Studio. Yep. That was very inside the ecosystem. It wasn't like buying, it wasn't like buying a major e-commerce vendor that has its own, or like I wrote a piece recently that there was a slide floating around and no one attributed it to anyone, and Microsoft doesn't claim it, but about trying to make Power Apps a $10 billion development platform for business apps.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And it's. I think I made it pretty clear in the article. This isn't Microsoft's official statement. They're not forecasting it or anything. It's just it's sort of this unknown slide that was from a Microsoft person. Anyway, to me, my first thought was, they could get to $10 billion. They just need to acquire Smart Sheets or some whatever. I mean, some either an on-demand app builder or a process type of firm and. Whatever, and go from there to kind of reach that number. But I don't see it happening.
Well, you say that.
Never
right?
say never, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, and we've been around long enough to watch this space. I think that whole citizen developer thing, the Power Apps environment, has grown more than people were aware of. Okay, and Charles has really pushed that. I think. He's got, despite the surfer haircut, I think he's got some vision there that was really surprising. They managed to bring Power Apps forward to the point now where a lot of the Power Apps environment is allowing citizen developers to do their thing, but the fact that you have controls over them. But there's check-in, check-out, there's version control. There's a lot of high-end management on this thing, and a lot of us are old enough that we remember the Access days, right, when people would be writing all these Access databases and applications and doing things on their own. They still kind of do that in spreadsheets, but the problem with Access in the past was you couldn't control it from an enterprise standpoint. Right. People would put it on their machines and run it. The thing with Power Apps is you still are allowing those people to do their own development and come up with their own capabilities and stuff. But the only way they can use them is if they deploy them in the cloud. And that's when you get to see them. And so from an IT security controls perspective, I kind of like Power Apps because it lets those people come up with great ideas, but I get to regulate how they're used.
That's definitely a big debate in the space right now. And let me put that back to you. Are you seeing clients of yours trying to wrestle with that as it relates to the Power Platform?
Yeah, and so a lot of them are taking a very pragmatic approach. These are large enterprises. They know that people have Excel spreadsheets that do all kinds of things they're not supposed to do. They know that there's still a bunch of VBA stuff out there running. They know there's Access databases that are doing different things. They know that people write their own apps to try to get their jobs done anyway. And so they know this already occurs. What they do is they protect the perimeter so that data doesn't get released where it's not supposed to be, and they kind of try to control this internal development as much as they can. They're looking at Power Apps as a way of saying, at least let's get these people on the same development platform that is updated in the same perspective, so I don't have an Excel 2013 spreadsheet running something. let's get some understanding of how to support each other so we do the right thing, and let's have regulatory controls over it so that we know when data is being released and can put a stop on it. The bigger item on this, Jason, isn't, I don't think, do we allow this in our organization? It's how much is this going to cost? Because that can go rampant.
You mean in terms of licensing out a
Yeah.
bunch of Power Apps users who are going to build multiple, all using multiple apps to do different parts of their job?
We're usually finding most of our enterprises now are saying, if we're going into this, we're going all in, because the break point is, if it's less than 10 apps or something like that, then it's one price, or less than 2 apps, it's one price. Yeah. But if you go over that, then really you don't get benefit until you've got like 20 apps per user, and everybody's come up with their own metric on that. And so we see a lot of people saying, we're going to go all in.
Go all in. Don't leave behind other
Yeah.
apps that you might have been paying for, and just focus the money on that.
Yeah. The other nice thing on it is, if you have an app, a Power App that's deployed out there, that, let's say you have 1,000 people in your organization that are using it, and the person that wrote it quits and goes somewhere else, at least you have similar skill sets within the organization where you can take that over and start managing it. And that's helpful.
Yeah, I one of my well, it's interesting to hear that those cost considerations are coming into play. I can't imagine they wouldn't, because at $40 per user per month, it does add up if you're trying to scale it out to hundreds of employees, or if you're going to give each of them a Power App to run within the context of Teams or within the context of SharePoint, or there's a huge number of potential users, which Microsoft loves, but it's going to make that's a whole nother consideration for a CIO.
Yeah.
I do have to I'm just going to share an unsolicited opinion here. I think the citizen developer term I think its time is up with Power Apps. I think I don't think you can keep that notion going and talk to big, enterprises about their, centers of excellence for global management of development around Power Apps, and have them both going, because it's not citizen developers. I don't know. I personally think they need to do away with that. If they're going to be talking to CIOs about how to make this a part of their overall IT strategy.
We still call them power users. Most of our customers call them that. And you've always had that, right? Let's say you've got 10,000 people in your organization that use Excel. There's going to be 500 or so that are power users. And these people are the ones that you're going to pay attention to, that you're going to help and support. And you're also going to keep guard over, because what they do is the stuff that can hurt you. Everybody else is just a user. And I think that's what you're going to wind up in both organizations with Power Apps. Citizen developer, I agree, that sounds it's like democratizing data, right? Drives me nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I mean, off mic, I've heard plenty of people say, they don't want anybody touching the Power Apps other than, the core trusted group of, developers and knowledgeable, tech focused people in an organization. They don't want, citizen developers. It sounds great, and but
I think that's a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I think you can, mistake, that's probably harsh. I think that some organizations, if you want to stay that way, that's fine. I think there are organizations where you've got enough of a new generation of employees that have grown up with all the technology that we've been supporting for years, right? And this new generation has skill sets. And to say that, and it depends on the organization, right? But if your organization is one where you've got folks who are power users, who can do these developments, who are comfortable with it, and actually have creative ideas, then it's a situation of, maybe we ought to let them do some of this, just gate it within our organization, and the really good stuff, we'll thank them and adopt it, and then take it on. It's almost like having skunk works going on around your organization. It's not necessarily bad. I know I'm a dissenting view on this, but I'm surprised that I actually feel this way.
I've seen a couple of good. I still think back to almost a year ago when I saw two really great demos of big organizations using Power Apps, and they did it differently. Both in the energy industry. One was Schlumberger and one was Chevron. They're both big Microsoft references at this point for Power Platform, and they both had great stories. But they were also both doing things differently to solve a lot of the same problems you just mentioned. But I think those are going to be, critical for Microsoft. Having those and more are going to be critical for Microsoft to point to for other big organizations, saying it is possible. These companies are making it work within their existing structures. They're not, and they're just getting benefit from it. It's not creating sort of massive disruption. It's just allowing them to do some of those streamlining efforts that everybody wants. And those have really stuck with me. Those types of stories. All right. Well, I know we wanted to keep things moving here. Before we close out, what can we sort of look for next from you, or what are you working on that's going to be coming out soon in terms of, I don't know, reports or other kinds of research that you're preparing these days? I know you've always got something in the works.
Yeah. So, one of them that we're doing is putting together a Power Apps evaluation kit that actually takes a look at all the different scenarios associated with Power Apps and Power Platform and does a comparison with the rest of the internal stack and find out what's compatible, what's controllable, why an organization would choose one over the other, and how could they make these things work together in an intelligent way. That one, I think we're still probably a good month away from having that done. It's a big effort. The other one is I'm taking a look at, it used to be a real concern of mine, Jason, is the Biz Apps group, okay? And I think James Phillips and crew are doing wonderfully. I've known James for a while, and I think he's got a good handle on where this whole thing is going on it. My only concern with this Biz Apps group, and this is Dynamics and the Power Platform and Power BI, is it's a bit insular as compared to the rest of the Microsoft environment. Okay, they like to stay in their world. They like the common data service. They like everything controlled within Biz Apps, and so they're doing some things. Example on it. Okay, Project for the Web is based on the common data service. It's not the same as Project Online. And right now there are not good migration tools if you wanted to move from Project Online to Project for the Web, but Project for the Web is where the future is. And so there's this disconnect for a couple more years, I think, until we've got parity and we can move over. Things like Power Apps data flows or Power data flows, right, that are there for Power Apps and the rest. Data flows is an ETL-like tool. It's for transferring data around, right?
Right.
Well, if they already have analysis services and they're already using Power BI and reporting services from SQL Server, then why didn't they use integration services? And the reason why is it doesn't belong to James. And James didn't want to use it in his Biz Apps world because he didn't have control over it. And so they're writing data flows based on the common data service that exists within Biz Apps. But if I'm a traditional SQL Server guy, okay, and I've got my databases, I've got my BI stuff, all my SQL Server reporting services, I got my analysis services models, and I've got my integration services, what I can do now is I can take my analysis services and my reports into Power BI and they work great. Okay? But if I'm doing something along the lines of wanting to bring over my integration stuff, my ETL stuff, that's all in integration services, there's no path to data flows. I have to set up Data Factory and run it there in Azure. And so it's not a full picture. They kind of kept themselves isolated in certain areas where I don't think they should.
That's got to be a tough series of choices. Like you said, I think if I had to guess, it's that question of what can I control and what can and what do I have to count on another team to deliver to me? That always seems to be a tension at Microsoft.
Yeah. Who's got P&L that's controlling what I'm doing?
Yeah, I mean, one that comes to mind is back when Microsoft, when they first made the decision to run AX on Azure before even finance and operations, part of the plan was we'll do on-prem, but you'll just have to run it on Azure Stack. And that they quickly had to ditch that idea because I think they realized that Azure Stack was just moving in a whole different timeline, and it wasn't going to be ready anytime soon to meet those particular. Well, the product was going to launch. It probably wasn't going to meet AX specs anytime soon, and if it did, it was going to be a huge effort and everything. So they went away from that one. That's one that comes to mind. But just one other thought about, because I was thinking about James Phillips's organization. He's now sort of president, and it almost feels like it's come full circle to me in a little ways, that he's kind of now the new Kirill in terms of role, not as a leader, not really trying to compare them, right?
No, I think James is much nicer.
I think it's because they really broke down the organization after Kirill left, or left the company, sort of distributed all the responsibilities to the various corporate groups within Microsoft, marketing, R&D. But it seems like it's sort of coming back together now under James as he's built up more trust and I suppose success, that they've kind of, it's now sort of looking like a little more like a mountain again, with him at the top of it, the way Kirill used to be. But I'm kind of trying to. I'd love to hear if you get more insight onto that, because I'm trying to. Microsoft's not always really giving with its sort of, and I know that's something that Directions on Microsoft follows very closely, right? Is the sort of the org chart, and sort of how that changes over time.
Yeah, we used to do that heavily, and now we kind of just do it for political reasons because they kind of cut off our access. But I think your assessment on James and that crew is exactly right. He came in. There was an awful lot of focus on Power BI in the beginning, and they did a great job there. I mean, he had a wonderful vision 5 years ago of what this was going to be like, and was able to deliver on that. Got more control over more Biz Apps. He brought in Charles. He brought in a few other folks with some really creative ideas. And so they've pushed the envelope a bit on what Microsoft traditionally does, and really made this a substantial group. And he got promoted, corporate VP, and now he's president of the Biz Apps group, and they made that there. In any corporation, not just Microsoft, but any corporation, that's not only a testament to their belief in James, in the direction he's headed with this, and you can see that in the profitability and the revenue of this whole group, but it's also a way of making sure he doesn't go anywhere. Okay. And so if I'm an outside customer looking at this, I've got a lot more confidence that Microsoft's going to keep this going and commit to it than I did in the past.
That makes sense. Interesting point. Excellent. Well, Andy, I think we can start to wrap it up. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this. This is kind of, we always end up chatting like this at events, so I'm glad I finally got it on tape here, so to speak, to kind of share your thoughts with everyone else who listens. We'll have to do it again, compare notes down the road sometime.
Yeah, no, sounds great.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Andy Snodgrass of Directions on Microsoft for joining me today. If you have any feedback, please do get in touch. jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.